corridor was narrow and cold, lit by long strips of pale blue light that made every shadow look sick, and the air smelled like metal and old fear. The kind that sticks to walls and does not leave even after washing. An alien official walked slowly past the security doors. His thin hands folded behind his back. His eyes reading the status screens on each cell almost without seeing them, because routine makes even horrors feel normal. Until he reached the end of the row and the routine broke. He looked in, blinked once, then again, as if his mind refused to accept what his eyes were telling him. The cells were small, meant for smugglers or debtors or anyone the Empire did not like. But inside these ones were children, human children, small and quiet and watching, their faces pale but calm, their clothes simple and torn, their eyes very, very old. He did not speak at first. He only stood there while the guards laughed softly behind him, saying it was nothing special, just contraband, just a problem to process and ship off. He turned slowly, his voice low and flat, and asked them if they understood what this was. The nearest guard shrugged and checked a tablet. Said they had orders from a border magistrate to hold the assets until a buyer arrived. Said the buyer paid well for rare specimens. Said humans were hard to find in this sector. Said a lot of words that sounded like noise, and the official felt something heavy settle in his stomach. A feeling like the air before a storm. He told them to open the file, show the full chain of custody, show the authorizations, show anything that made this legal, and their eyes drifted, their ears went hot, their hands started to sweat, because the papers were thin and the signatures were poor, and everyone in the room knew what that meant even if no one said it. It meant someone greedy had made a choice, and everyone else had nodded along because it was easier to nod than to say no. Inside the cell, a girl with dark hair stood and came close to the field, not touching it, just near enough that the light ran along her cheek. She asked in a soft voice when they could go home, and the official could not answer because the word home cut deeper than any law. He had seen war, he had seen famine, he had seen ships burn and stations freeze, but he had never seen a child ask that question in a prison that pretended to be clean. He turned back to the guards and his voice shook for the first time. He asked where they found these children. The sergeant said a patrol cutter intercepted a small freighter near the edge of the mapped lanes. The freighter tried to run, failed, and offered a bribe. Inside the cargo bay they found cages, some empty, some not. The crew said they were saving the children from pirates. The papers said the same. The sergeant grinned like a man daring fate and added that pirates and saviors wear the same coat when money is good. The official closed his eyes and exhaled, because he understood the story behind the story. He had seen it 100 times with minerals and medicines and rare animals. He had just never seen it with children, human children, and that word human was a spark in dry grass. He remembered old records that new officers laughed at. Records from centuries back when the Empire first met Earth. When the first human ships came out of the dark and did not bow. The records said the Empire learned then that humans were quiet until they were not, and once they were not, nothing could make them quiet again. He stared at the children, counted them without counting, saw bruises on small wrists, dirt on small cheeks, but something else too, something steady and bright that no fear had put out. A boy with a bandage on his forehead stood very straight, not crying, not pleading, simply waiting, and the official realized he was being measured, judged, weighed like a coin in a merchant's hand. The boy asked if the ship was safe. The official asked which ship. The boy said the ship that would come. He said it like a fact, not a hope, as if he knew a schedule the official did not. The official glanced at the ceiling, at the cameras, at the dead corners where the microphones were old and lazy. He lowered his voice and asked the sergeant if anyone outside this station knew. The sergeant said the manifest was quiet. The magistrate was paid to keep it quiet, and the buyer liked quiet more than air. The official felt the storm move closer. He told them to shut down external comms and cut the station's beacon for maintenance. He ordered the cells sealed and the children given water and real food, not paste, and he told the guards to keep their hands off the stun rods because he would have their badges if he saw a single mark on a single child. The guards started to argue until they saw his face. He was not a soldier but he had authority, and authority is its own weapon. They backed away with tight mouths. He turned to the console and tried to send a secure message to the sector office. The system returned a soft chime and a red line of text that said the channel was unavailable due to scheduled upgrades. He tried a second line, then a third, each one failed, and a small cold voice inside him said that upgrades do not happen all at once, not without a reason. He looked at the timestamp on the intercept report. He looked at the security log. He saw gaps. He saw edits. He saw a pattern that spelled a single word. Trap, not for the children. They were already trapped. But for anyone who tried to help them or sell them, and he wondered which was worse, the buyer who would come to claim them, or the hand behind the buyer who would deny everything after the fact. He went back to the window. The girl with dark hair was watching him. He told her they would be okay. He told her he would not let anyone take them. The words felt too big in his mouth, but he said them anyway because sometimes saying a thing is the first step to making it true. The girl nodded once and sat down again, calm as a moon. The calm of someone who has already survived more than she should have. Alarms did not sound. The station did not shake. Nothing dramatic happened. Time simply moved forward with the quiet cruelty of a knife sliding through cloth. He ordered the kitchen to prepare meals. He ordered medical to send clean blankets and a real medic, not a bot. He made lists because lists are what people make when they cannot control the sky. And he waited for the buyer, because the buyer would come. Money always comes. In the security room, 2 guards whispered about old HFY stories. Aid the command was locked by the magistrate. He smiled without humor and told them to pull the fuses by hand. The tech stared and then obeyed, because fear can be a ladder or a wall, and right now it was a ladder. The sweep came online in a hiss of static and then drew a single line across the screen where nothing should be. Not a ship, not yet, just an absence. A hollow in the numbers as if the void itself had turned dense. He did not say the word, but everyone in the room thought it. Terran. The station's clock ticked, the kitchen sent trays. The medic knelt by a boy with a fever and whispered kind things. The children ate without noise, as if silence were food and they had learned to live on it. The official stood with his palm against the glass as if he could press the wall down by will alone. And he thought of the guards who had laughed, the magistrate who had signed, the buyer who was coming, and of a ship that might be moving through the dark with quiet engines and old scars. A ship that would not ask for permission or forgiveness. A ship that would arrive like a sentence at the end of a long bad paragraph. He whispered to the sergeant that if anything strange happened they were to cut power to the docking ring and lock all clamps. No matter who signaled, no matter what badge they showed. The sergeant opened his mouth to argue and then closed it. He said yes, and in that yes there was the first small crack in a wall built from greed and habit. The official went back to the console and wrote a report he could not send. He described everything as if some future court would read it and weigh his soul. He wrote their names where he could find them. He guessed where he could not. He wrote the bruise on the wrist and the rip in the shoe and the way the boy stood straight. He wrote the word children so many times it stopped looking like a word and became a bell ringing in a long hall. The station lights flickered once, just once, the kind of flicker that makes. Most people blame old wires, but in the security room nobody breathed, and far away in the docking ring a tiny green diode went dark. The buyer's ship arrived without running lights, without a transponder, just a hunched shape sliding up to the ring like a thief's hand sliding into a pocket. The clamps tried to engage and did not, because the sergeant had already cut them. A voice on the open channel said to stand down, said the magistrate had approved transfer, said there would be consequences. The official replied that consequences had already begun the moment someone put a child in a cage. The buyer laughed and tried to force a lock. The lock did not answer because the power at the last junction did not exist anymore. Someone had pulled it and thrown it into a bucket on the floor. The buyer's voice turned cold and promised to come around another way. And at that exact second the long-range sweep drew a second line, deeper than the first, darker than the background. A line that was not a line at all but the edge of something huge and quiet. The tech stared and said the numbers were wrong. The official said the numbers were finally right. The guards looked at one another and felt their hands shake, not from fear alone but from relief, because something was arriving that would make this choice simple. The official went back to the glass and faced the children. He did not know if they could hear him through the field, but he spoke anyway. He said help was coming, he said. They would go home. He said he would stand in the door when the time came. The girl with dark hair nodded once as if she had been waiting for him to catch up to what she already knew. Her eyes flicked up, past him, to some point above the ceiling where a hull might slide and a shadow might fall. And in that small quiet nod the official found the strength to be the person the moment needed. Alarms still did not sound. Speeches were not given. The station did not roar to life. It only held its breath as the night outside rearranged itself. The buyer's ship backed away from the ring, slowly, carefully, like an animal that has smelled a larger predator. And in the long window at the end of the corridor a shape moved behind the stars. Not bright, not loud, only there, heavy as a promise, calm as a verdict, close enough that even men who had never believed in legends felt something in their bones say a single word. And the word was enough to make even the bold step back from the cages. To make even the cruel lower their eyes. To make even the official forget his fear and remember his duty, the word was human. The prison did not sleep after the first discovery, though the guards pretended it did. Their footsteps kept circling the corridors, boots clanging against metal floors, and their nervous laughter echoed far too loud in the silence. Everyone knew something had shifted, though no one dared to say it aloud. The cages that held human children had become more than contraband, more than evidence of corruption. They had become a curse waiting to explode. The official walked the station's long hallways with a heavy heart, every door he passed whispering the same question. What happens if humanity finds out? He had studied history, old records buried under layers of censorship. He remembered stories of Earth's vengeance, of battles where humans fought until even their enemies feared their silence more than their fury. The guards did not believe such tales, but the official did. And as he looked again at the faces of the children, faces too calm for their age, too watchful, he felt the weight of those old stories pressing closer. One of the younger guards whispered near the mess hall that humans would never know, that no one would speak of this, that the buyer would take the children and it would end. But even as he said it, his voice cracked, because deep down he felt what everyone felt. This was not something that could be hidden. Humanity had a way of knowing. The station air grew heavier by the hour. The systems flickered more often, comms failed at strange times, and every shadow seemed thicker than before. Some swore they heard a low hum in the walls, like the heartbeat of a massive engine somewhere just out of sight. Inside the cells, the children no longer looked afraid. They whispered to each other in soft voices the guards could not understand. They did not cry. They did not beg. Instead, they waited. It was this waiting that unnerved the guards most. As if the children knew something the adults did not. As if rescue was already coming, and nothing could stop it. The buyer's ship was due to arrive, but delays piled up. Schedules shifted. Messages came late or not at all. The sergeant cursed the lazy clerks back at the magistrate's office, but the official said nothing, because he recognized the signs. This was not laziness. This was interference. Something outside the Empire's control was already moving. One night, alarms flickered for only a second, too brief to trigger lockdown, too faint to locate. But in that second, a new mark appeared on the long-range scanners. A hole in the data, a blank where stars should have been. The technicians swore it was an error. The official knew better. He whispered the word to himself, a word his people had not dared to speak in centuries. Terran. And in that moment, though the station still floated quiet in the void, though the cages still glowed with their false safety, everyone on that outpost felt the same thing. The galaxy had just changed. Humanity was coming, and the Empire had no idea what storm it had woken. The council chamber was built to make lesser beings feel small, a great circle of stone and light with banners hanging like frozen waterfalls, and a ceiling so high that voices had to climb for a long time before they came back down. Yet on this day even the tallest banners felt thin and the echoes felt afraid. Rulers from 100 worlds filled the seats in their bright robes and hard armor. Messengers ran in the aisles, with tablets clutched tight, and every face showed the same question. Is it true? The high speaker called the hall to order with a heavy chime. Then called again because no one wanted to be quiet. At last the sound settled and the first governor stood and said there was a rumor that someone had caged human children. He asked if the Empire would deny it. The second governor stood and said it was not a rumor, that a border station had seized a freighter with cages on board, that the station now held the cargo. The word tasted like ash. A hush fell that did not feel like peace. It felt like a cliff edge, and a thin old counselor from a species with glassy eyes leaned into his speaking stone and said very softly that if this was true the council was already too late. You do not cage human children and expect the sky to remain calm. Laughter tried to rise, the kind of nervous laughter people use when they want to push fear away, but it died fast because every leader in that room had heard old stories, stories told in kitchens and barracks when the lights were low, stories about Earth, about quiet ships that came without flags and left only silence. The imperial envoy in gold stood tall and said the matter was under investigation, that the law would be followed, that this was an isolated crime and would be handled. He used smooth words like process, compliance, jurisdiction, but the words slid off the stone like water because the third governor, a woman with iron plates along her neck, raised a shaky hand and sent a recording to the ceiling, The air turned into a window and the chamber watched a row of cells under blue light. Small faces behind an energy field. A girl lifting her chin. A boy standing straight with a bandage on his brow. The sound was not loud. Footsteps. A soft question. When can we go home? No one breathed while it played. When the image closed there was no debate about whether it was real. The silence was proof enough. The speaker asked. Where this was taken, the answer came from a clerk with a grey voice, a prison outpost near the edge of the mapped lanes. The clerk added that communications from that station had been irregular for 2 days. They had called it maintenance. Now the word tasted wrong. The chamber fragmented into noise. Some shouted for the children to be released at once. Some demanded the arrest of the magistrate who had signed the transfer papers. Some said it was a trap set by human spies, that the recording was false, but those words sounded weak and old. A trade prince with polished horns asked the hardest question. Who bought them? Because cages mean a buyer, and buyers mean protection. The imperial envoy's eyes flicked down to his tablet. Then away. He said the buyer's name was sealed under court privilege. The hall erupted, a mountain of anger rising at once. And in that storm a quiet old scholar rose and the sound fell by habit. The scholar said the hall should stop lying to itself, that this was not about law, not about trade, not about a single magistrate. It was about a line that no empire should cross, a line that every species knows in its bones. You do not touch the young. You do not break the small. You do not turn a child into a thing. He said you can fight humans and perhaps survive. But if you harm their children you step out of history and into judgment. You become a lesson, not a power. The envoy slammed his staff and called the words sentimental and unhelpful. He said. Fleets were being prepared to protect the station. He said order would be restored. He did not say from whom. A messenger stumbled in, pale, and handed him a strip of light. The envoy read and his mouth tightened. He announced that an unidentified ship had been detected near the prison outpost. Sensors were unreliable. But there were reports of a large mass with no transponder and heavy emissions hidden under noise. The hall did not need the word. They could feel it press against their skin. An admiral with scarred cheeks spoke fast. He said they must move the children immediately to a deep facility, one no one could reach. A senator snapped that moving them now would be proof of guilt. That the council must first issue a statement of care, promise kind treatment, open inspections. The admiral said kindness would not matter. The only thing that mattered was speed, because if a Terran ship was near, there was no safe harbor left in the outer rings. They argued in circles because circles felt like action, while in their hearts they knew action lived elsewhere. A young delegate asked a simple question that cut through all the noise. Have we told Earth? The envoy said contact had not been established and the hall understood the truth inside the answer. They had not told Earth because they were afraid to. A governor from a water world stood with tears on her face and said her oceans had seen war and famine and plague, but she had never imagined she would stand in a beautiful room and listen to clever people discuss how to speak about cages for children. She said if they were to survive what was coming, they had to speak like living beings, not machines. Release them, she said. Release them now. Send a ship with food and blankets and a medic and a camera so the galaxy can see you are not monsters. A cold minister replied that releasing them would be an admission of guilt and the council would never survive the political cost. The water world governor said. The cost would be higher if they did nothing. The minister asked how she knew. She said because the sky was already listening. As if to answer her, the chamber lights fluttered, just once, the kind of tremor that anyone else would blame on old wiring. But the hall had been perfect for a century and perfection does not flicker without a hand. The chief of security touched his ear and frowned. The envoy insisted the glitch was nothing and pushed a resolution to form a committee, to audit the station, to prepare a message that called for patience. The scholar said patience was a fine word for men who were not inside cages. Somewhere high up a banner stirred. Though there was no wind, many looked up and then looked back at their hands because looking up felt like admitting fear. A courier arrived breathless with a sealed shard from the border command. The speaker cracked it and read silently, then read again. His throat moved. He said in a thin voice that the buyer's ship had docked and been refused by the station. He said the station's clamps had been cut. He said the station had shut its ring on its own authority. The hall murmured like a hive. A small piece of hope flickered. Someone there was trying to do right. The envoy frowned deeper and demanded the name of the official. The clerk replied the file was incomplete. Perhaps edited. The envoy said then it was a mutiny and must be crushed. He called for Marines to retake the outpost. An admiral whispered that there were no Marines close enough who would arrive before whatever was out there chose to act. The scholar said a thing that no one could answer. Perhaps the only way to survive was to help, not to fight, send ships to escort the children back to their families, send ships with open comms and open hands, show the Terrans that there are still people in this galaxy who can tell the difference between a crime and a law. The envoy hissed that the council must never look weak. The Water-World governor asked when mercy became weakness. No one could remember the day. A low tone rolled through the chamber, not from any bell or staff, a pressure, a hum, a sound like a vast engine far away. The acoustics carried it in their bones. The security chief blanched and said the signal was not local, that it was riding the general band like a tide. The envoy barked for jammers. The chief said jammers were useless. The sound was not a message. It was presence. The hall waited without meaning to wait. And then a voice came through every device and every implant and every public screen across the council's world. The voice was clear and human and calm. It said, "You have taken what is ours, return them now." The words were simple and they did not threaten. The threat lived in the quiet between them. The envoy tried to speak over it and could not. The voice filled the room like tide water. It said there would be no negotiation about children. It said names were recorded, accounts were traced, ships were flagged. It said those who chose to protect the children would be spared. Those who chose to sell them would be remembered. It ended with a sentence that made strong. Hands shake, we are near. The sound ended as if a hand had closed a door and the hall listened to its own heartbeat. A captain from a proud war world stood on shaking legs and said they should fight. That honor demanded it. A smaller voice beside him asked if honor would feed the children when the hulls burned. The speaker asked for votes on a motion to release the children at once and escort them under oath. The envoy moved to block and failed because too many hands rose too fast. The motion passed by a margin that would have shamed them any other day. The envoy called it cowardice. The scholar called it survival. Orders were drafted, ships were assigned, messengers ran. But thick things move slowly and guilt is a thick thing. A final courier came with news like a blade. The Second Grand Fleet had left dock to secure the border and would arrive at the outpost in hours. The admiral who had sent it was not answering calls. The envoy smiled thinly as if strength had returned. The scholar closed his eyes because he knew the fleet would not bring strength, only more ghosts. The Water-World governor asked the clerk if the station had responded to the council's new order. The clerk said the station was already acting on it before they voted. They had cut the buyer loose. They had fed the children. They had called for a medic. The governor nodded and said then perhaps there was hope. The envoy said hope was not a plan. The hall for once did not argue because they all felt the truth like cold air. Whatever plans they made now would be judged by a ship none of them controlled. The speaker lifted his hands and told the hall the only words he could say with a straight spine. We will try to do the right thing before it is too late. The banners did not applaud. The stones did not comfort. The lights did not brighten. Outside, somewhere beyond the warm clouds of their old capital, a shadow was moving across the stars toward a small station where a girl had asked when she could go home, and in the chamber where laws were born, no one felt powerful anymore. They only felt watched. The news spread faster than light. The moment the council chambers echoed with the human voice demanding the release of the children, the message raced across every relay, every trader's channel, every pirate's whispernet. Worlds that had never agreed on anything agreed on one thing now. Something terrible had been done, and something even more terrible was coming in answer. The galaxy held its breath, waiting for the next sound. On the prison outpost itself, the air was thick with dread. The guards who had laughed before no longer smiled. They kept glancing at the ceiling as though expecting it to crack. Some wanted to abandon post, but fear of the Empire's punishment kept their boots nailed to the ground. Others stayed frozen in place, gripping their rifles too tightly, knowing in their hearts that rifles would mean nothing if the humans came. The official, the only one who had truly understood the gravity of this crime, moved quickly now. He ordered extra food and water for the children. He checked locks and power lines, not to hold the cages closed but to make sure they could open at a moment's notice. He kept his words short and his eyes steady, because he knew panic would spread if he faltered. In orbit above the station, small Imperial patrol ships began to gather, their commanders nervous but trying to show strength. They spoke loudly on the comm, promising protection, promising that no shadow ship would ever dare strike them. But in the silence between their boasts, every crewman felt the same icy question. What if it was already here? Rumors spread that their scanners were blind, that something massive had been seen near the edge of the system, that sensors flickered when they faced the black between the stars. No proof, only silence, and silence was worse than proof. The Empire tried to seize control of the story. Loud declarations blasted across the core worlds, calling the reports lies, saying the Council had been tricked by human propaganda. They said the children were safe, said nothing had been done, said the Terran voice was a forgery. But in markets and taverns and mines, no one believed them. Everyone remembered the old warnings. Never cross the humans. Traders who had once mocked those tales now whispered them with trembling voices. Soldiers at checkpoints tightened their grips and looked at the sky more often. Even criminals and pirates began avoiding human trade routes, afraid that shadows might fall on them if they strayed too close. And then came the first sign. A patrol wing of 5 cruisers reported a disturbance at the edge of the system. The message was calm at first, then broken with static, then ended with a single scream. Hours later, debris was found drifting. No survivors, no flight recorders. Only twisted metal, as if the ships had been erased in silence. The outpost shook with fear, because everyone understood the truth. Humanity was not asking anymore. Humanity was here. Inside the cages, the children still did not cry. They sat close together, whispering, sometimes smiling faintly. They did not act like prisoners. They acted like people waiting at a station for a train they knew would arrive. And when one of the guards asked a boy why he looked so calm, the boy answered in a voice far too steady for his age, because they are already coming. Far across the void, in the council's marble chamber, lords and rulers shouted and wept. Some demanded to surrender at once. Others screamed to unleash every weapon the Empire had. But their voices no longer mattered. For the first time in living memory, power had slipped from their hands. It now belonged to the silence in the stars, to the ship that had not yet shown itself but already ruled their fear. And as the outpost lights flickered once more, the official standing by the cages whispered words the guards could barely hear. "Do you even understand what you've done?" The guards did not answer. They could not. Because even as he spoke, a shadow vast and patient was sliding through the system, and the galaxy itself was beginning to shake. The first sighting was not clear, not the way the Empire wanted. They wanted scans, measurements, clean lines on a chart. What they got was silence broken by fear. A forward patrol in the outer belt sent a fragment of a message, a voice full of panic saying only, "It's here," before the comm went dead. Hours later, wreckage drifted across the system like bones, ships torn apart without fire or noise. No survivors, no black box, only the strange quiet that follows a predator once it has fed. On the outpost below, the guards gathered in the mess hall with their rifles laid across their knees, pretending to eat, but their hands shook. No one laughed now. They spoke in whispers about ships disappearing without sound, about scanners turning blind when pointed toward the edge of the stars. One swore he saw a shadow crossing the horizon, blacker than the void, but when others looked there was nothing. The sergeant cursed at him, yet kept glancing up at the ceiling as though waiting for it to split open. The official who had discovered the children walked the halls like a man carrying a storm on his shoulders. He visited the cages again, looking at the small faces behind the shimmering barriers. They were still calm, too calm. The girl with dark hair asked softly if it would be today, as though she had been counting the hours. He asked her what she meant. She said, "The ship. We feel it." The words struck him deeper than any order. She was not afraid. She was waiting. He wondered if all of them knew something he did not. Above the planet, the Imperial fleet gathered at last. Dozens of cruisers, heavy carriers, and dreadnoughts took formation around the outpost, their hulls gleaming with gold and steel, banners shining as if pride alone could ward off fear. Their commanders broadcast loudly on every channel, declaring that the Empire was eternal, that no shadow ship could break their wall of fire. But deep in the command decks, the crew whispered different words. Some had seen the ruins of the First Fleet. Some had read the fragments of reports. They spoke of one ship standing against thousands and not falling. They spoke of weapons that burned silently, of shields that bent space itself. And though their admirals shouted for courage, their hearts were already broken. The first tremor came when every scanner blinked at once. No alarms, no warnings, just a sudden drop in data, as though the universe itself had exhaled. Then a shape appeared against the stars. Not a bright streak. Not a roar of engines. Just a black silhouette sliding out of the void, so vast that for a moment the crews thought a moon had moved into orbit. No markings, no banners, only scars glowing faintly across its hull, like the embers of battles older than the Empire itself. The Terran battleship. The fleet panicked. Commands overlapped, ships fired thrusters too fast. Lines broke before a shot was fired. Admirals shouted for formation, for calm, but their voices could not hide the truth. Every eye was fixed on that shadow, and every soul knew it was already too late. Still, the order came, fire. Thousands of beams lanced across the void. Missiles streaked like comets. Plasma cannons roared. The sky burned white. For a heartbeat, the void itself seemed to die under their fire. And then the light faded. The Terran ship was still there, untouched. Its hull glowed faintly, as though it had absorbed the storm and found it unworthy. No cracks, no smoke, no flicker of damage. Just silence. The battleship moved. Slowly, steadily, like a predator walking through tall grass. A single line of light pulsed from its side, silent and sharp, and an entire squadron of cruisers broke apart. Their hulls sliced cleanly as if cut by invisible hands. Another pulse, and a dreadnought, the pride of the fleet, exploded in a blossom of fire, its wreckage scattering like ashes. No sound, no wasted motion. Every strike was final. Panic turned to chaos. Ships tried to retreat, engines flaring, but no matter which way they ran, their compasses spun wild. Space itself bent, folding them back toward the shadow. Some fired blindly, others begged for mercy on open channels, but the Terran ship did not answer. It only continued its slow, deliberate work. On the outpost below, the guards watched the battle on flickering screens. Some dropped their rifles. Others wept openly. The official stood by the cages, his eyes fixed on the sky above, and whispered to himself, "They came." The children pressed against the barrier, their faces glowing with something that looked almost like joy. Hours later, the void was silent again. The Imperial fleet was gone. Only wreckage drifted in the dark, burning faintly. And the Terran battleship remained, floating above the outpost like a black star, patient and terrible. It had not sent demands. It had not spoken. It had only destroyed. And its silence was louder than any threat. The galaxy trembled. For the first time in 1,000 years, the Empire's pride had been broken not by an army, not by a rebellion, but by one ship. One Terran ship. And everyone who saw it knew. This was only the beginning. The wreckage of the fleet still drifted when the voice came. It did not roar, it did not thunder. It simply appeared, calm and clear, on every channel across the system. Soldiers froze at their posts, civilians stopped in the streets. Even the guards in the outpost held their breath as the sound reached them. It was a human voice, steady, almost gentle, but with a weight behind it that pressed against the chest like gravity. "We came for the children. Not for war. Release them now, and this ends." The words carried more power than the destruction that had just taken place. 1,000 ships had been broken, yet it was the calm tone that made the galaxy tremble. The Empire had built its rule on fear, and here was something that did not even need fear, it only needed truth. In the council chambers, far across the stars, leaders stared at one another in silence. Some wanted to seize the voice and broadcast it as propaganda, twist it into weakness. Others saw the wreckage reports and knew better. The message was not weakness. It was control. Humanity was not negotiating. Humanity was setting terms. On the prison outpost, the official felt his throat tighten as the children lifted their heads, their faces bright with sudden life. They had been waiting for this moment. The girl with the dark hair whispered, "I told you." The boy with the bandage stood straighter, his eyes steady, and for the first time the guards looked away, unable to hold that gaze. The sergeant swallowed hard, turned to his men, and ordered them to stand down. No one argued. The rifles lowered, and in that lowering something broke inside them, not just loyalty to the Empire, but the illusion that it could still protect them. Still, pride dies hard. Across the system, pockets of resistance clung to orders. An admiral on a surviving carrier broadcast that the Empire would never kneel, that humanity was bluffing, that reinforcements were already on the way. His voice cracked halfway through, and before he could finish, his ship's engines shut down without a shot fired. Lights dimmed, power bled away, and the carrier drifted cold and helpless. The Terran battleship did not destroy it. It simply left it floating, humiliated, powerless. That act was worse than fire. It showed choice. It showed mercy that was not mercy but judgment. The rebellion spread like a flame through dry grass. On slave worlds, workers threw down their tools and shouted the word Terran. On colony stations, soldiers refused orders to fire. Messages raced across smuggler nets and merchant bands, repeating the same truth. Humanity had returned, and they had come not as conquerors but as protectors. The sight of their children in cages had awakened something far older, far stronger, than any Empire fleet. The Council met in emergency session. Voices shouted across the Great Hall. One faction demanded immediate surrender, to beg Earth for peace before worse came. Another raged that humanity must be crushed, that to bow now was to end the Empire forever. But their words had no teeth. For centuries, the Council's commands had shaped the galaxy. Now it was the shadow above a prison outpost that shaped everything. And everyone in that hall knew it. Back at the outpost, the official gave the order at last. The cells opened with a hiss. The barriers fell. The children stepped out, blinking, stretching their arms, but still calm, still steady, as though they had known this moment would come. A medic knelt to check them, and one of the boys took his hand, not in fear, but in thanks. The guards watched in silence, shame burning in their eyes, none daring to speak. The Terran voice came once more, final and sharp. They are free. This is over. Do not test us again. Then the channel cut. The battleship remained above for a moment longer, its massive shape blotting out the stars, and then it moved, slow and deliberate, before vanishing into the void without sound. But its absence was not silence. Across the galaxy, the echo of its words still rang. And in that echo, the Empire's hold cracked further. No one feared its fleets anymore. No one believed its promises. For the first time in 1,000 years, the galaxy feared something else, and it was not fear alone. It was awe. The rebellion did not roar at first, it whispered. A mechanic on a mining moon quietly shut down the overseer's transport and handed the keys to the workers. A squad of soldiers on a frozen outpost lowered their rifles instead of firing into a crowd. A governor on a forgotten colony tore down the Empire's banner and told his people to stand tall. None of these sparks were grand, but together they spread like fire through dry grass. The Terran battleship did not need to order it. Its silence was enough. In the slave camps, the word Terran became a chant. Men and women who had bent under chains for generations now stood and refused to kneel. Overseers tried to shock them back into obedience, but the rods sparked once, then died, as if even the machines had chosen a side. Rumors ran faster than patrol ships. Humans had come, humans had spoken, humans had destroyed an Empire fleet for the sake of children. No decree, no speech from the Emperor, could bury that story. It lived in every whispered voice, in every rebellious hand. On frontier worlds, soldiers gathered in their barracks and argued in low voices. Some swore loyalty to the Empire, others whispered that fighting humans was suicide. A captain from a proud war world told his men to prepare for duty. Instead, they laid their weapons at his feet and said they would not kill children for banners. The captain stared at them and said nothing, because deep down, he agreed. The council chambers cracked under the pressure. Factions split wider every day. Some demanded peace with Earth, others demanded more fleets, but fewer and fewer ships answered the call. Even admirals known for their pride quietly stepped back, refusing orders they knew were suicide. The Empire's voice grew hoarse, shouting for unity, but the galaxy had stopped listening. The galaxy was listening to something else, the echo of that calm human voice saying, "They are free. Do not test us again." Merchants, once fearful of Terran raids, now flew openly with human symbols painted on their hulls, believing it would protect them. Smugglers carved the word Terran into their ships as if it were a shield. Even pirates stopped preying on human cargo, too afraid of drawing attention. For the first time in history, fear itself was working against the Empire. Back on the prison outpost, the children were no longer prisoners but passengers, waiting for the ship that would carry them home. The official who had opened their cells watched over them in silence, feeling the weight of history on his shoulders. He knew his name would vanish from the records, scrubbed by an empire desperate to erase shame. But he also knew the truth. The galaxy would never forget this moment. The cages had been broken, and in their place something far stronger had been born. And somewhere out in the dark, the Terran battleship drifted, patient, unstoppable, its guns quiet, its engines steady. It did not need to show itself on every world. It did not need to conquer. It only needed to wait. The Empire was already collapsing from within, undone not by war but by the simple, undeniable truth. You do not cage human children. The Emperor's palace was built to remind the galaxy of fear. It rose from the capital's surface like a mountain of black stone, towers crowned with firelight, walls etched with the victories of 1,000 years. Every visitor was meant to feel small when they entered, every servant meant to bow lower, every soldier meant to see nothing but power in its shadow. But power that must shout to be seen is already fragile, and tonight the cracks showed. Inside the council chamber, voices no longer carried the weight of command. The lords argued like frightened children, robes wrinkled, eyes wild. Some demanded to strike Earth itself, to burn humanity's cradle before it could rise further. Others shouted that Earth was no longer the target. Humanity had already left the cradle, already placed its hand on the stars. Fear clung to every word. The admiral of the Second Grand Fleet had not returned. The patrols sent to the border were silent. And above every world, rebellion smoldered. The Emperor sat on his throne of obsidian, hands clenched on the arms as if squeezing the stone would hold the Empire together. His golden robe did not shine as it once had. It hung heavy, a chain disguised as silk. He called for order, his voice shaking the chamber, but no one listened. The chamber that had once bent under his will now bent under the memory of a single human sentence. We came for the children. Not for war. Then the lights flickered. Not once. Not briefly. They died, leaving only the pale glow of the city beyond the tall windows. Murmurs filled the air. Guards raised rifles. Technicians tapped frantically at dead consoles. For the first time in centuries, the council chamber was powerless. And then, slowly, the high glass roof darkened. Not from clouds, not from nightfall, but from something vast sliding across the stars. The Terran battleship. It blotted out the heavens, its hull scarred and silent, its shadow falling over the palace and the city beyond. No fleet moved to intercept. No cannons fired from the ground. Every gunner who saw it through a scope lowered his hands. Every soldier who had sworn to defend the Emperor clenched his teeth and stayed still. The ship did not need to attack. Its presence was enough. A voice filled the chamber, calm and unshaken, as if speaking to children caught in a lie. You caged our young. You broke the one law no species may break. This is your judgment. The Emperor tried to rise, tried to shout, but his voice cracked. He demanded they fight, demanded they show strength, but no one moved. The lords looked at their feet. The guards stared at the floor. His empire had already abandoned him. The voice continued. We do not seek war. We do not seek dominion. We seek only this. No chain shall hold a human child again. No cage shall close on them. This is the law now. Your empires may stand or fall, but this law remains. The chamber trembled, not with sound, but with the weight of finality. The Emperor collapsed back onto his throne, the gold of his robe a mockery against the dark. He had no reply, no order, no empire left to command. Outside, across the galaxy, the message spread like wildfire. On slave worlds, chains were broken that very hour. On border stations, soldiers laid down their arms. On merchant ships, crews cheered. And then, just as silently as it had come, The Terran battleship drifted away, sliding back into the void like a shadow at dawn. It had fired no shot, yet it had ended a dynasty older than memory. The galaxy would not remember the Emperor's last words, for he had none worth remembering. What they would remember was the law humanity had carved into the stars. Touch their children, and you invite extinction. From that day, the galaxy obeyed. Not out of loyalty, not out of law, but out of fear of silence. The silence of a battleship waiting in the dark.